Hello and welcome to this video, which I'm going to use to show you how to use the indicative content from the mark scheme to answer every question. And we'll use here the question from the specimen paper on Lady Macbeth. And I'm going to exemplify the method where you quote from the extract first, and then you relate it to something wider in the play as a whole. And this technique, of course, also works for your 19th century novel. So let's remind ourselves of this speech. This is Lady Macbeth. We find out that it's the point in the play where she's just received news that King Duncan will be spending the night at her castle. The raven himself is hoarse that croaks the fatal entrance of Duncan under my battlements. Come, you spirits that tend on mortal thoughts, unsex me here, and fill me from the crown to the toe, top full of direst cruelty. Make thick my blood, stop up the access and passage to remorse, that no compunctious visitings of nature shake my fell purpose, nor keep peace between the effect and it. Come to my woman's breasts and take my milk for gall, you murdering ministers. Wherever in your sightless substances you wait on nature's mischief, come, thick night, and pull thee in the dunnest smoke of hell, that my keen knife see not the wound it makes, nor heaven peep through the blanket of the dark, to cry, hold, hold. So we read through once to refamiliarize ourselves with the text. And what would happen in the exam is you'd pick on anything that occurs to you in the quotation about Lady Macbeth. Let's nip down to the question. We have to talk about how Shakespeare presents her as a powerful woman. So the theme we're going to talk about is power. Well, what I train you to do is to start off with a thesis. In other words, what is Shakespeare's view of power? Well, I can use the indicative content to find out what the examiner thinks I should say. So he thinks, or she thinks, I'm always doing that because I'm a bloke, sorry. She thinks that power should be linked to status, and then it should be linked to her relationship with Macbeth, and not to include here Shakespeare's view of whether women should or shouldn't have power. However, you want to include Shakespeare's viewpoint because you want your answer to be conceptualized. So I can start off by quoting here. So the fatal entrance of Duncan under my battlements. So although Duncan is the king, she is showing her superiority because she places him under her own battlements. And this reveals, this metaphor reveals her desperation to become more powerful than him. However, we also have the use of irony here, because although this entrance is fatal for Duncan, he's going to be killed later in the play under Lady Macbeth's instructions. It's also these same battlements from which Lady Macbeth is going to throw herself when she commits suicide. So there's an ironic image here. The raven himself is a reference to death, a harbinger of death, but the irony is that it's also a harbinger of her own death. Okay, so hopefully you can see how I referred to the rest of the text to match my quotation. The next thing to focus on is Lady Macbeth's power in terms of her relationship. So here I can focus on the quotation, unsex me here. Lady Macbeth wishes to become masculine, a man, because this is a patriarchal society, society ruled by men, and she needs to be the equal of her husband. And we can now move elsewhere in the play. Macbeth calls her my dearest partner in greatness in that letter that he's just sent her. So he hints at the possibility of their equality. Then I can go further into the play. Once Macbeth has been crowned, he starts to exclude her. So he doesn't tell her about the murder of Banquo. Be innocent of the knowledge, dearest Chuck, he says to her. How now, why do you keep alone? She says to him. So we can see that the power relationship changes, and she is no longer treated as an equal. There are lots of other references I could make, but I'm not going to. Yeah, I'm just going to work my way just through the indicative comment to show you how you can structure your essay and your revision using this, because these themes will pop up if you're writing about Macbeth. You know, just because this is about Lady Macbeth doesn't mean that the themes will necessarily change. So this revision will help you for both characters. Okay, well, next, the examiner thinks I ought to look at how Lady Macbeth is a powerful or effective character in the play. Well, we can look at this idea. Come to my woman's breasts and take my milk for gall. This is a reference to the fact that she's still producing milk. So her baby, and Macbeth's baby, has died very, very recently, and she's still lactating. This, of course, explains her murderous intent. You know, her mind is unbalanced, and we can link that to how Macbeth's mind is similarly unbalanced. He's also suffered the death of his child, but moreover, he's just come from a battle in which he has slaughtered the enemy, and we can quote that line, unseamed him from the nave to the chops, to show quite how ruthless and bloodthirsty he's become, or how he's thrown his shield out in front of him, got rid of his shield in order to fight more easily. He's become reckless in that battle against Norway. Or we could use it to link to the theme of this milk idea, how her milk becomes poison, and she needs therefore to poison Macbeth's milk, and we'd link that to his milk of human kindness, that metaphor. So hopefully you can see how any quotation in the passage can remind you of another idea elsewhere in the play that you can link to the theme of the question, in this case, power. Okay, well, now I want to look at how Lady Macbeth changes as the play develops. Well, I'm going to pick on this quotation here, that my keen knife see not the wound it makes. So this personification of the knife is an attempt by Lady Macbeth to avoid the horror of what she's doing. She doesn't want to see quite how diabolical her plan to kill Duncan is. She doesn't want to face those consequences. And of course, I can then link that to her sleepwalking scene where she's plagued by guilt. Many quotations in that. Out, damned spot. I can focus on the word damned and show how she now knows that she's definitely going to go to hell, and that now matters to her, whereas before she was welcoming the smokes of hell because she hadn't really thought about the real consequences of her actions. And so it's that lack of thought about the consequences, the moral consequences, that lead to her eventual suicide. Okay, now I should point out you wouldn't need all of these in your essay, but I'm demonstrating them all to you just to make your revision that much better. Now I can come to assessment objective 2, how Shakespeare uses Lady Macbeth to influence the plot development. Well, here I'm going to focus on this quotation here. So she's attacking the idea of caution and patience because that's the very thing that she's going to attack in Macbeth. So she's going to urge him, and he needs urging. You remember that quotation, I have no spur to prick the sides of my intent. So Macbeth is worried that although he wants to kill Duncan, he hasn't got enough motive to do so. So Lady Macbeth becomes that motive. put this night's great business into my dispatch, she says later to persuade her husband. Or you could also pick on the image of the baby again that comes from here, and where she talks about dashing its brains out. She'd rather kill her own child than break her promise, as Macbeth seems to be breaking his promise to kill Duncan. Um, so she drives him on. I can go for an extra layer of sophistication here and ask, well, why on earth did Macbeth take the trouble to write the letter to his wife when he's going to be there, to see her maybe half an hour after the letter arrives? Why does he take the trouble to write it? And one of the things that I tell my students is, well, he knows his wife really well, and he wants her to come up with a plan. He knows that he lacks the spur to kill Duncan. He knows that she is right. He is too full of the milk of human kindness, and she will bring her own gall, her own poison, um, to bear on him and force him into action. And so he knows his wife so well, and he uses her persuasive powers deliberately. So he's not the victim of those powers. He's a willing collaborator. Next, I can look at the language that suggests Lady Macbeth's desperation for power. Well, again, I can link that to the unsex me here. The psychological damage that would do from going from being a woman to being a man. Literally a sex change that happens if we take the idea that the spirits are supernatural. That will happen immediately. The other way we can see her desperation is that she knows the ministers, the witches that she's praying to at this time, are murdering. She knows they're entirely evil. She knows that her soul will go to hell, and yet she's willing to risk it for temporary glory in her life on earth. The temptation to become queen is so powerful. Now, I could make a wider point here that Shakespeare does this to show how women are marginalized in this society and therefore turn to desperate measures to get power because it's the only way they can get power. I can link that to the Weird Sisters, for example. Why do they suddenly turn to spells and magic to try and influence Macbeth and Banquo? Well, perhaps it's because they don't have any power in this society, and so they're turning to evil masters like Hecate to try and get control in this world where they have no control. Or I can look at the other female character, Macduff's wife, and look how critical she is of Macduff for simply abandoning her, not treating her as an equal partner at all, but just leaving her to become a victim. So you can easily make a case for Shakespeare attacking his society's view of women as inferior to men. And in that one that I've just given you, I've already talked about the imagery of the supernatural. I'd link that to the witch's desperation for power and how that's mimicked in Lady Macbeth. And the use of the effect of pronouns to suggest power and control. So my, me, we could look at that as complete self-obsession. She's not really interested in Macbeth becoming king. She's only interested in Macbeth becoming king because that makes her more powerful as queen. And again, we could link that to that quotation where she says, leave this night's great business into my dispatch. She knows that she's a much better planner than Macbeth is, and that she can come up with the perfect plan to kill Duncan for them to get away with it, which is exactly what happens. Macbeth, of course, nearly blows their cover when he kills the grooms, and Lady Macbeth is then forced to faint. But equally, her selfishness at that point is also revealed through the personal pronoun when Macduff says, the king has been killed and she says, what, in our house? And that personal pronoun reveals the wrong thought. She's much more worried about herself than the fact that the king's been murdered. So we could argue that that's a turning point in the play. It's at this moment that all the nobles begin to suspect that perhaps the Macbeths have engineered Duncan's murder. Now, what's interesting here is that context carries far fewer marks. So assess AO1 carries 12 marks, AO2 carries 12 marks, AO3 carries only 6. And you'll find that breakdown at the top of the mark scheme: AO1 12, AO2 12, AO3 6. So why are there so many bullet points under AO3? Well, one of the reasons is that you have to be exploratory and conceptualized. So you have to have that thesis and follow it through, and you have to explore different interpretations. And the easiest way to do that is to write about how people would have interpreted it at the time, or writing about Shakespeare's viewpoint. And so, actually, although context is only marked for 6 marks, it allows you to write about AO1 and AO2 in much more depth. So ideas about how power is achieved or perceived, here we could start linking it to the patriarchal society again. We've already mentioned that, so we've already hit AO3 by mentioning the patriarchal society. Ideas about the role of women, well, we've already looked at that when we talked about the Weird Sisters and Lady Macduff. So actually what we're doing is using our context while we're discussing AO1 or AO2, and that gives us those different perspectives from this extract and elsewhere in the play. The attitudes towards the supernatural. Well, I haven't mentioned that here, but obviously I can. So we can look at Lady Macbeth's prayer, if you like, to the supernatural powers. So you murdering ministers, wherever in your sightless substances you wait on nature's mischief. And we've got 2 choices here. One contextual choice is to say that Shakespeare included the supernatural and the witches because King James, for whom he performed this play at Hampton Court in 1606, had written a book called Demonology, and had also been a judge in a witch's trial. So he was obsessed with witchcraft. But what's really interesting is he wrote the book Demonology because other writers were suggesting that there were no such thing as witches, that it was just superstition. And so Shakespeare's siding with the king here, trying to present the witches as a real supernatural force. However, we can look at what actually happens in the play and say that the witches have no influence at all. They never tell Macbeth to do anything. And so Macbeth chooses to murder. He makes that choice. And Lady Macbeth makes that choice. The witches don't do anything to him. Yes, they tell him that he doesn't have to fear, and no man born of woman shall harm Macbeth, but they don't tell him to do anything about this. So they're not in any way responsible for what actually happens. So Shakespeare could actually be arguing at the same time as presenting the witches in the play as a real supernatural force. He could be asking for a closer reading and saying, but hang on, if you look at the play as a whole, you'll see that actually these apparently supernatural beings have no power. They don't do anything wrong. It's quite interesting when you start approaching it that way, because it throws all the guilt, if you like, to Macbeth and Lady Macbeth. If I want to discuss ideas about the soul and heaven and hell, well, I already have, haven't I? I've said that once Lady Macbeth realizes what she's done to her soul and it's actually going to go to hell, and this is what drives her to madness and eventually to her own suicide. At least that's part of the reason that she does so. Ideas about equality and status I've already mentioned, with Lady Macbeth wanting to be superior to Duncan, and we've already related that to the patriarchal society. Then we've got the contemporary reception towards Lady Macbeth's behaviour in this speech and actions elsewhere in the play. So I haven't mentioned that. Obviously, Shakespeare's audience would have been horrified at Lady Macbeth's violent actions and also violent desires. Now, we don't know what Shakespeare's view of that was, whether he thought Lady Macbeth's behaviour was much worse because it was so atypical of female, or actually whether he's portraying Lady Macbeth to say to his audience, look, women are the equals of men, it's just in our society we don't treat them that way. Um, I could easily pick on the fainting that she does when Macbeth kills the grooms, and it's very clear that she pretends to faint in order to distract the Thanes from what her husband has done. He's clearly killed the grooms so that they can't say that they didn't do it and they can't be investigated. Um, so that the fainting is completely fake, it's false. Well, Shakespeare could easily be introducing that to say that this view of women as the weaker sex who are um, so easily influenced and so easily made afraid is actually a false one. He's actually saying women are just as real, if you like, as male characters. And of course, we can use the death of Lady Macduff in the same way in her conversation with her son about how she's been betrayed by her husband, because this isn't just the stereotypical woman moaning. She's actually absolutely correct. It's a complete act of cowardice that he's abandoned his family and left them to die. There isn't a reasonable expectation on his part that Macbeth wouldn't attack his castle, and the fact that he's not there to defend it, and by extension, neither are his men, because he would have, had a household of armed men himself. He's left them completely defenseless. Um, just shows how wicked the patriarchal society is, where women are treated as mere possessions, and their loss is cause of great sorrow to him, but not enough for him to have taken his family with him. So, some key things that we've learnt from the mark scheme. If we use the indicative comment, we prepare ourselves for almost any question. If the question were about Macbeth, many of these facts that we've looked at would still apply. Obviously, they apply to any question about Lady Macbeth, no matter what extract we get given. The second thing that we've learnt is that the context bullet points are greater than everything else because they allow you to get into the higher bits of the mark scheme. They allow you to be exploratory and allow you to be conceptualized in your response. And then finally, I've taught you about the structure of your essay. You leap in anywhere in the extract, find a quotation you want to write about, and then compare it to something else elsewhere in the play, either in terms of the theme of power or in terms of the language. And as long as you're talking about the theme and the language and the author's point of view each time, you can't fail to get the top marks. So there we go. Theme, language, author's point of view, which is always the context, and the marks will just fall into your lap. You need determination to do this. Don't panic and suddenly write loads and loads about the extract. You're allowed to do that, of course, but it will stop you getting that balance where you're forcing yourself to link a point you make here to its use elsewhere in the play. And that's the easiest way to get into the top band. Well, congratulations for getting this far. The logical next step is to do this essay, write it under time conditions, and then come back to the mark scheme and see how much you remembered. That will then make you remember it even more, and you will nail any Lady Macbeth question in the exam.